Imagine showing up for a job interview, hopeful and determined, only to be met with hostility and prejudice from the very person meant to welcome you. That's exactly what happened to Marcus, a confident, kind-hearted man who happens to use a wheelchair. From the moment he stepped into the office, the HR manager's disdain was impossible to ignore. Her condescending tone and pointed comments about his abilities revealed a shocking bias. Little did she know, Marcus wasn't there for an entry-level position, he owned the company. What unfolds next is a story of justice, accountability, and an unforgettable lesson in humility. As Marcus keeps his identity a secret, the manager's true colors come out in ways that are both infuriating and eye-opening. Stay tuned to see how Marcus reveals the truth and holds her accountable. This story will remind you why respect and empathy should always come first. Marcus had arrived at the company under the guise of a job applicant, wanting to experience firsthand how potential employees were treated. He'd heard rumors about issues in the hiring process, but needed to see it for himself. From the moment he rolled through the office doors, the HR manager, Linda, barely masked her disdain. Her forced smile faded quickly, replaced by an icy, dismissive attitude. She glanced at his wheelchair, then at him, with a look that said she'd already made up her mind. As Marcus sat across from her desk, Linda's tone was sharp and condescending. She questioned his qualifications without even glancing at his resume, focusing instead on his physical limitations. "Are you sure you can handle a corporate environment like this?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. Marcus stayed calm, noting every word. He wanted to see just how far her bias would go before revealing the truth. Linda continued with the interview, but it felt more like an interrogation. She barely let Marcus speak, interrupting him with dismissive comments or exaggerated sighs. "This position requires someone who can really keep up with the fast-paced demands," she said, eyeing his wheelchair as if it disqualified him on sight. Marcus kept his composure, letting her assumptions reveal themselves. Meanwhile, employees passing by the office couldn't help but glance through the glass door. Some looked uncomfortable, others appeared too nervous to intervene. It was clear this wasn't the first time Linda had acted this way. As the conversation went on, she became bolder, making sly remarks about fitting the company image and openly questioning how Marcus could contribute effectively. What Linda didn't realize was that Marcus had been observing the entire company for months. He already knew who was thriving, who was struggling, and who, like her, was the source of those struggles. As the interview dragged on, Linda's arrogance grew. She leaned back in her chair, smirking as she dismissed Marcus's responses with patronizing comments. "You know, I've seen people like you try to make it in this field, but let's be honest, it's not for everyone." Her tone was laced with false sympathy, as though she believed she was doing him a favor by not taking him seriously. Marcus, calm and collected, continued to respond thoughtfully, watching as her prejudice blinded her to his qualifications. But her behavior wasn't just about him. It was about how she treated anyone she deemed unfit for the company. Her dismissive attitude hinted at a pattern, and Marcus knew this was his chance to expose it. The tension in the room was thick as Linda finally leaned forward, ready to end the interview. "Honestly," she said with a smirk, "I don't think this is going to work out." But before she could finish her sentence, the office door opened, and another senior employee stepped in, their expression tense. "Excuse me, Linda," they said, glancing at Marcus with recognition, "but I think you need to know who you're talking to." Linda's confident smirk faltered as she looked at the senior employee. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone sharper now, betraying a flicker of unease. The employee hesitated for a moment, glancing between her and Marcus. "This is Marcus," they began, their voice steady but purposeful, "the CEO of the company." For a split second, silence filled the room. Linda's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then panic. She let out a nervous laugh, trying to mask her shock. "Oh, I didn't realize we were doing a hands-on evaluation," she stammered, her confidence evaporating as she scrambled for words. Marcus remained calm, but there was now an intensity in his gaze. "I came to see how our hiring process reflects the values we claim to uphold," he said, his voice steady. Linda opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Marcus leaned forward slightly. "And so far," he continued, "what I've seen is disappointing." But before the weight of his words could fully sink in, the senior employee cleared their throat. "There's more," they said, their tone serious. "Linda, we've received multiple complaints about your behavior toward candidates and employees." The room grew colder as Marcus raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor making the moment even more unnerving. Linda's face went pale, the realization hitting her. This wasn't just an interview, this was a reckoning. Linda's confidence crumbled completely. She fumbled for an excuse, her voice shaking. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I always treat candidates fairly. Marcus, I didn't mean." But Marcus held up his hand, silencing her mid-sentence. His calm composure made the moment even more powerful. "You didn't mean what?" he asked, his tone measured but firm. "To judge me before looking at my qualifications. To assume my abilities based on my appearance." Linda's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but there was none. The senior employee, still standing near the door, nodded subtly at Marcus. It was clear they had been waiting for this moment. Marcus took a deep breath, then turned to Linda. "This company was built on the principles of fairness, respect, and inclusion," he said. "Your actions go against everything we stand for. Effective immediately, you're relieved of your position." Linda froze, unable to speak. But before she could leave, Marcus added one last twist. "The complaints against you," he said, "weren't just from employees, they also came from clients. And I've already met with them to ensure they know we're taking action." Her face turned ghostly white, realizing the full scope of her behavior's consequences. As Linda left the room in silence, Marcus turned to the senior employee. "Let's make sure our hiring practices reflect the culture we want here," he said. Then, with a quiet but determined resolve, he rolled out of the office, leaving everyone in stunned silence, reflecting on what had just unfolded. In the days that followed, the company underwent a transformation. Marcus made it clear that diversity, equality, and inclusion weren't just buzzwords. They were the foundation of the company's culture. New policies were implemented to ensure fair treatment for all employees and candidates, regardless of their background or abilities. The employees who had witnessed Linda's behavior began to feel empowered, knowing their voices had made a difference. Linda, meanwhile, was left to face the consequences of her actions. Her dismissal wasn't just a professional setback, it was a stark reminder of the importance of empathy and open-mindedness in the workplace. For Marcus, the incident reaffirmed his commitment to leading with integrity. It was a powerful lesson that, even at the top, standing up for what's right wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. In the end, the company grew stronger, more unified, and more committed to the values it truly stood for.